"You should have accepted the money," the man said, laughing while the flames ate through 2 years of Ethan's life. "Now look at what you've got left." Ethan didn't answer. He stood in the street and watched his father's vest burn. And somewhere deep inside him, something that had been sleeping for 20 years opened its eyes. If this story moves you, if you believe some things in this world should never be touched, subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part to the end. Please, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Red Valley, Montana was the kind of town that people either loved deeply or forgot completely. Tucked between dry hills and long stretches of nothing, it wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. The population hovered around 4,000. The main road through town had 3 traffic lights, a diner, a feed store, a hardware shop, and one leather workshop that smelled like tanned hide and linseed oil from 30 feet away. That workshop belonged to Ethan Walker. He'd been in Red Valley for 19 years, long enough that most people had stopped wondering where he came from. He was just there, the way the mountains were just there, permanent and quiet and easy to overlook. He was 34 years old with hands that looked 15 years older, thick, scarred, steady. He didn't talk much. He didn't drink at the bar on Friday nights. He didn't go to church or town council meetings or the 4th of July parade. What he did was work. 6 days a week, sometimes 7 from before sunrise until the light gave out. He repaired saddle leather for the ranchers up north. He made custom riding gloves and belt holsters and custom-fitted jackets for people who drove in from 3 counties away because nobody else did the work the way Ethan did. Every stitch was intentional. Every cut was clean. The leather he chose for each piece was chosen by touch, by weight, by the way it responded to pressure. He could feel quality in his hands the way a musician hears a flat note instinctively without trying. But none of that was the most important thing in the workshop. The most important thing was locked in a flat cedar box beneath his workbench, wrapped in linen cloth, sealed with a brass clasp that had turned green with age. Inside that box was a leather vest, not one he'd made for sale. Not one he'd made for a customer. He'd made it for his father, for the memory of his father, because the man himself had been gone for 11 years, taken by a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and too many goodbyes. Ethan had started the vest 3 months after the funeral and worked on it for nearly 2 years. Every panel of leather had been selected, cut, shaped, tooled, and stitched by hand. The back panel alone had taken 4 months. It depicted an eagle with its wings spread wide, talons curved downward, head turned to the left, the way his father always turned when he was thinking hard about something. Around the eagle, Ethan had tooled a border of interlocking geometric shapes, a pattern his father had once sketched on a paper napkin and told him meant strength through simplicity. It wasn't for sale. It wasn't for display. It lived in that cedar box, and Ethan would sometimes sit at the end of a long workday and open the box and just look at it, just to remember, just to feel the weight of something that mattered. Megan Carter knew about the box. She'd been Ethan's assistant for 3 years, and she was 26 years old and sharp as good shears. She'd come to the workshop broke and desperate after dropping out of community college, looking for any job that paid cash. And Ethan had hired her after watching her fix a broken buckle with nothing but a nail and a pair of pliers in under 4 minutes. "You've got hands that listen," he told her that first day. She didn't know what that meant at the time. Now, she did. Megan knew the rhythm of the workshop. She knew how Ethan liked his coffee black with 1 sugar, never 2. She knew that he worked in silence until 10 in the morning, and after that he didn't mind conversation. She knew that he kept the cedar box locked, and that she was never to move it, never to open it, never to leave it on the floor because the floor carried humidity. And she knew that whenever Ethan was under real stress, he would rest his right hand against the side of that box for just a moment, like he was drawing something out of it that couldn't be seen. The stress had been building for months. It started professionally enough. A man named Victor Caldwell had sent a letter through a law firm, a polished, impeccably worded letter on heavy cream paper expressing interest in acquiring the property on which Ethan's workshop stood. The letter mentioned fair market value. It mentioned a development opportunity that would benefit the community. It mentioned that a representative would be available to discuss terms at Ethan's earliest convenience. Ethan read the letter twice, folded it carefully, and filed it in the trash. 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. This one was less friendly. It referenced zoning considerations and potential code compliance reviews, and the importance of maintaining positive relationships with development partners. Ethan read this one once and filed it the same way. Then the visit started. A man in a gray suit showed up at the workshop on a Wednesday morning and introduced himself as Dennis Galt, representing Victor Caldwell's development company. He was the kind of man who wore shoes that cost more than most people's monthly grocery bills and acted like he was doing you a favor by standing in your doorway. "Mr. Walker, ease," Dennis said. "Ease." Looking around the workshop with the particular expression of a man calculating the square footage rather than seeing the space. "Mr. Caldwell is prepared to offer you significantly above market value for this property. You'd be set for years, maybe decades." Ethan was stitching a saddle at the time. He didn't look up. "Not interested." "I wonder if you've considered the full scope of..." I said, "Not interested." Still not looking up. "Close the door on your way out. The dust gets in." Dennis left. But Victor Caldwell was not a man who accepted the word no. Not from anyone. Not from small-town leather workers or cattle ranchers or century-old family businesses or long-established churches. He had spent 20 years building a development empire in Montana, Wyoming, and parts of Idaho, and he had learned a simple principle. Everyone had a price, and if they didn't have a price, they had a vulnerability. The code inspectors came next. 3 of them with clipboards and serious expressions, citing 17 violations that hadn't existed the week before. The violation notices referenced structural concerns, electrical irregularities, fire safety deficiencies. Ethan hired a contractor friend to evaluate each one, and the contractor told him flatly that 9 of the 17 were fabricated and 6 more were technicalities, so minor they were almost laughable. "Someone leaned on the inspection office," the contractor said. "This is a pressure campaign." Ethan absorbed that. He filed the appeals and paid the fines for the legitimate violations and refused to move. Then the windows started breaking. The first one went at 2 in the morning on a Thursday. Ethan woke to the sound and came down to find the display window shattered, a rock on the floor, and nothing else. He swept up the glass, boarded the window, and called nobody. The second window broke 10 days later. This time there was a note wrapped around the rock. It read, "Take the money." 3 words, block printed in marker. Megan showed up the next morning and saw the boarded windows and looked at Ethan with a question forming on her face. "Don't," he said quietly. "I'm just going to ask if you're..." "I know what you're going to ask, and I'm fine." She put her bag down and tied on her work apron and let it go. Because she'd learned, over 3 years, that there were rooms inside Ethan Walker that were locked for reasons she didn't fully understand, and pushing at the doors didn't open them. They just made him go quieter. What Megan didn't know, what nobody in Red Valley knew, was that Ethan had spent the 3 weeks since the first window broke making quiet preparations. Not aggressive ones, not defensive ones. Preparations of a different kind. He'd written 3 letters that he kept in his jacket pocket. He'd made 2 phone calls from a burner phone he bought at a gas station 2 towns over. He hadn't dialed. Not yet. He'd just stored the numbers and told himself he wouldn't need them. He kept telling himself that. Right up until the afternoon, everything changed. It was a Thursday, 3 weeks after the second broken window. Megan had gone home early because she had a dental appointment. Ethan was alone in the workshop, finishing the final stitching on a custom jacket ordered by a rancher from Billings, when the bell above the door chimed. He didn't look up immediately. He finished the stitch he was working on before he set down the needle. 3 men walked in, not customers. Anyone who'd been in this work long enough knew the difference between a customer and trouble. Customers walked in looking at things. These men walked in looking at him. The one in front was big, not just tall, but wide. The kind of wide that comes from work rather than gym time, with a jaw like a cinder block and eyes that had spent a lot of years deciding how much a situation was going to cost. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His name, Ethan would learn later, was Cole Briggs. And he had done this kind of thing, this particular kind of work for Victor Caldwell for 6 years. "Mr. Walker," Cole said. Not a question. Ethan stood. He was not an especially large man, 5'11", lean, wearing a worn canvas apron over a plain gray shirt. He looked at the 3 men and said nothing. "Mr. Caldwell wanted us to follow up," Cole said. On his offer. "His office sent 3 letters and a man in expensive shoes," Ethan said. "I gave them all the same answer." "Yeah." Cole looked around the workshop slowly, like he was taking inventory. He thought maybe a more personal conversation might help you reconsider. It won't. Cole nodded slowly like he'd expected that. Like this was all going exactly according to a script he'd rehearsed. That's unfortunate, Cole said, because Mr. Caldwell doesn't really do uncertainty. He likes to know how things are going to go. Then he should have stayed in whatever city he came from, Ethan said, because this piece of property is not for sale. It was not for sale last month. It was not for sale when his lawyers wrote their letters. It is not for sale today. That is not uncertainty. That is an answer. He's the second man. He's younger than Cole. He's with restless eyes. He's drifted toward the workbench and picked up a finished belt Ethan had completed that morning. Put that down, Ethan said. The man looked at him, then set the belt down not where he picked it up from, but on the floor. Something moved behind Ethan's eyes. Something that Megan would not have recognized if she'd been there to see it, because she'd never seen it before. But it was there, brief and controlled, gone before anyone could have named it. I think we're done, Ethan said. Cole took one step forward. Just one. No, I don't think we are. What happened in the next 4 minutes was deliberate and methodical and very, very bad. Cole nodded to his two companions. And they moved not toward Ethan. Not immediately. But toward the workshop. The youngest one swept a shelf of finished pieces onto the floor with one arm, a row of custom-tooled wallets and belts and small leather goods that represented 40 hours of work. The third man picked up a heavy wooden stool and put it through the glass case that held Ethan's specialty thread collection. Ethan moved toward the cedar box under the workbench. Not to open it, not to protect it. He got one hand on the side of it, and then Cole grabbed his shoulder and shoved him back against the opposite wall, hard enough to rattle the framed tools hanging there. Don't, Cole said simply. Ethan looked at him. Just looked. Where is it? Cole said. The box. And in that moment, Ethan understood something important. This wasn't random destruction. Victor Caldwell had done his homework. He knew about the vest. Not what it meant. There was no way he could know what it meant, but he knew it was the thing Ethan cared about most. You don't want to do this, Ethan said. His voice was absolutely level. Cole reached past him and pulled the cedar box out from under the workbench. Stop, still level, still quiet. Cole tossed the box to the younger man, who caught it, fumbled with the clasp, and wrenched it open hard enough to crack the wood. He lifted out the leather vest, the 2 years of work, the eagle, the tooled border, the stitching that had taken Ethan 4 months just to plan, and held it up. That's cute, the young man said. Please. Ethan said the word like it cost him something real. Whatever else you do here today, please don't touch that. Cole looked at him for a long moment, reading him. And then he smiled. Tell Mr. Caldwell you're ready to sell, Cole said. That's all you have to do. Ethan said nothing. Cole nodded to the man holding the vest. They walked out. Ethan followed them into the street because he didn't know what else to do, because his body was moving before his mind made any decision, because sometimes grief operates faster than thought. He came out into the afternoon light and found Cole standing in the street with a red plastic gasoline can that one of the men had pulled from the bed of their truck, and the young man holding the vest at arm's length over the asphalt. Cole looked at Ethan one more time. Last chance, he said. That vest, Ethan said, and his voice was strange now. Lower and slower than it had been. Belonged to my father's memory. I have spent 2 years making it. I have spent 19 years in this town. I have never asked anything of anyone. Then this should be easy, Cole said. Sign the property over. This goes back in the box. People had come out of the diner across the street. A couple standing outside the feed store were watching. A woman walking her dog had stopped on the sidewalk 30 feet away. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything. Red Valley had learned, in the months since Victor Caldwell's people arrived, that getting involved cost more than looking away. Ethan looked at Cole. He looked at the man holding his father's vest. He looked at the gasoline can. And then he said something that confused Cole for the rest of his life, because it wasn't a threat and it wasn't a plea. It was a statement. Quiet, flat, and absolute ease. You just made the worst decision you'll ever make in your life. Cole unscrewed the cap on the gasoline can. You should have accepted the money, he said, and poured. The flames went up fast and bright, the way old tanned leather catches clean at first, then greasy and dark as the deeper oils hit. The eagle on the back panel curled in the heat. The geometric border that had taken 4 months went in under a minute. The stitching that Ethan had placed needle-width apart across 5 panels glowed briefly gold before it went black and then gone. Ethan stood in the street and watched. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't move toward Cole or toward the fire or toward his workshop. He watched until the vest was entirely gone. Nothing left on the pavement but a black smear and the brass clasp, distorted and darkened from the heat. Cole and his 2 men got in their truck and drove away without looking back. The people across the street went back inside. The woman with the dog walked on. And Ethan stood alone in the street for a very long time. When he finally moved, it was back inside the workshop. He walked through the broken glass and the scattered leather goods and the shattered wood without looking at any of it. He went to the workbench. He opened the drawer where the burner phone was kept. He looked at the 2 numbers stored there. One of them he'd hoped he'd never dial again in his life. He dialed it. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered a man's voice, deep, unhurried, carrying the particular texture of someone who'd spent decades in the open air. Yeah, the voice said. Ethan, silence. It's not the silence of a bad connection. The silence of a man recalibrating something inside himself. He's Ethan Walker, the voice said finally. Yeah, another pause. It's been 17 years. I know, you walked away. I know that too. Silence again. Then what happened? And Ethan told him, not the whole story, not yet. Just the last 40 minutes. The 3 men. The workshop. The cedar box. The gasoline. The flames. He told it in short sentences, without editorializing, without emotion. The way a man reports a weather event. When he was done, the voice on the other end of the line was quiet for a long moment. You still in Red Valley? It said. Yeah, you still got that bench with the symbol carved in the leg? Ethan looked down at the workbench beside him. The underside of the left rear leg, where 19 years ago he'd carved it with a small knife late one night. When the past felt very close to the old mark, the symbol he'd been given the first time he was trusted with something that mattered. He's still there, he said. The voice on the other end said, then so are we. The line went dead. Ethan set the phone down. He looked at the mess around him, the broken glass, the scattered work, the smashed case, the cracked cedar box lying on the floor with its linen cloth hanging out like a tongue. He picked up the box, set it on the workbench, and closed what was left of the lid. Then he picked up his work needle from where he'd set it down when Cole and his men first walked in. He sat back down. He found the stitch he'd been working on before everything happened. And he finished it. Because Ethan Walker had learned, long ago, that the most important thing a man could do while waiting for a storm was to keep doing the work his hands knew how to do. It kept the mind from spinning into places it couldn't afford to go. It kept the body calm. It kept the self intact. Tomorrow was going to be different from today. He knew that with absolute certainty. But tonight, there was still this stitch, and then the next one, and then the one after that. The jacket for the rancher from Billings would be done by morning. He stitched through the night. He didn't sleep. And somewhere out there, on roads that cut through dark Montana mountains, engines were already beginning to turn over. Headlights were flickering on. Men who had not spoken his name aloud in 17 years were speaking it now quietly to each other with expressions that the people around them could not entirely read. Ethan Walker. The name moved through those conversations the way a stone moves through still water, fast at first, then in widening rings, reaching further than the original impact suggested was possible. By morning, Red Valley would not be as quiet as it used to be. By morning, Victor Caldwell would have no idea how thoroughly the ground had shifted beneath him. And Megan Carter, arriving at the workshop just after 7 with coffee in both hands and the dental appointment behind her, would push open the door and see the broken glass and the scattered work, and Ethan sitting calmly at his bench, stitching in the early light, and she would set the coffee down and look at him and ask the question she'd been holding back for months. Ethan, who are you? He would look up from his stitching. He would look at her for a long moment, and for the first time in 19 years, he would begin to answer. Megan had seen the workshop in rough shape before. A bad delivery gone wrong. A shelf that came loose and took half a rack of supplies with it. The time a pipe burst in the back room, and they spent 2 days drying leather with electric fans. She'd seen Ethan frustrated, quiet, tired. She'd seen him work through pain when he cut his palm open on a skiving blade and refused to stop until the piece he was working on was finished. She had never seen this. She stood in the doorway with two cups of coffee going cold in her hands and took in the broken glass and the shattered display case and the scattered leather goods across the floor and the cracked cedar box sitting on the workbench open, empty, and Ethan at his bench with his head down stitching, as if none of it had happened or all of it had happened. So long ago, it no longer required a reaction. She set the coffees on the nearest clear surface and didn't say anything for a full minute. She just looked at the cedar box, at the linen cloth hanging out of it, at the empty space inside where the vest always was. Ethan, he didn't look up. Morning, where is it? He kept stitching. One pull, two, the wax thread catching the early light. Gone. The word landed between them like something dropped from a height. Megan put her hand on the cedar box. She touched the cracked lid, the broken clasp. She looked at the empty interior, at the impression in the linen where the vest had rested for years. She looked at the floor, at the smear of black ash that had tracked in on Ethan's boots. They burned it, she said. Not a question. She already knew. Yes, Caldwell's people. Yes. She pulled the stool from behind her station and sat down across the workbench from him, close enough that he couldn't pretend she wasn't there. She waited until he set the needle down and looked at her. His eyes were steady, clear, not red. He hadn't been crying. He hadn't been sleeping either. She could see that in the particular stillness of his face, the kind of stillness that comes not from rest, but from hours of controlled not moving. Who are you? She asked. He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that she thought he was going to say nothing, going to pick the needle back up and go back to the stitching and let the question die the way a lot of her questions had died in this workshop over 3 years. Instead, he said, hand me my coffee. She handed it to him. He took a long sip and set the cup down and folded his hands on the workbench the way he did when he was explaining something technical, the proper way to skive an edge, the right angle for a saddle stitch, why you always cut with the grain and never against it. Before I came to Red Valley, he said, I was someone different. Different how? Different enough that I couldn't stay who I was and also stay here. Those two things couldn't exist in the same place at the same time. So I made a choice. Megan waited. She'd learned that with Ethan, the worst thing you could do when he was actually talking was interrupt. I was with a brotherhood, he said, the Hells Angels. Not on the edges of it, not as a prospect or a hangaround. I was inside it, deep, for 11 years. And for the last 4 of those years, I was someone people came to when things went wrong and needed to go right. He said it plainly, without weight, the way you state a fact about the weather. And yet the words rearranged something in Megan's understanding of the last 3 years. Every quiet morning, every careful piece of work, every locked drawer and closed door, inside this man she thought she knew. He's the Hells Angels, she repeated. Yes, you me. She looked at his hands on the workbench, the thick scarred knuckles, the steadiness. The way he'd always moved through the workshop like a man who had spent a lot of time being aware of where every person in a room was standing. Why did you leave? Something moved across his face. Not pain exactly. More like the memory of pain, which is different, older, quieter, more settled. I lost people, he said. My father got sick. 2 brothers I would have died for died instead, and not in ways that made sense. And I looked at who I was becoming, and I thought this isn't what he raised me to be. This isn't the man he saw when he looked at me. He paused. So I left. I found this town. I found this work. And I spent 19 years building something that didn't require me to be that other person anymore. And last night you called them, Megan said. He looked at her sharply. I'm not stupid, Ethan. I know what that empty cedar box means. I know what that phone in your drawer is for. And I know that whatever happened yesterday was different from the broken windows. Different from the inspectors. She leaned forward. They burned your father's vest. You called someone. He held her gaze for a moment. Then yes, who? He's a man named Marcus Bennett. He goes by Iron Wolf. He's the chapter president of the Montana Charter now. A pause. He was my closest brother before I left. Megan absorbed this. And what did he say? He said they were coming. The workshop went very quiet. Outside, a truck rolled past on the main road. A dog barked twice and went silent. How many? Megan asked. I don't know yet. When? I don't know that either. She sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment and then back at him. She said, okay, he repeated, like he wasn't sure what she meant. Okay, I understand. Okay, I'm not going anywhere. Okay, tell me what you need me to do. She picked up her coffee. I've been working next to you for 3 years, Ethan. You think one conversation changes that? He looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. She couldn't name it exactly. Ease. It was somewhere between gratitude and protectiveness. Ease. And it made him look. Ease for just a second. Ease much younger than he was. Nothing's going to happen to you, he said. I need you to know that. I know that, she said simply. Now drink your coffee and tell me what really happened last night. All of it, because I'm going to need to understand the whole thing. Ease. So he told her. Ease. And while he talked, he told it differently than he'd told it to Marcus, not in short factual sentences, but in full, real language, the way you talk to someone you trust. He told her about Cole Briggs walking in and the particular quality of his eyes, the eyes of a man who'd done this before and found it easy. He told her about the shelf going down and the display case going through and the cedar box being wrenched open. He told her about saying please and meaning it. He told her about the gasoline and the fire and standing in the street alone while the town watched from a safe distance and nobody moved. When he got to the part about the brass clasp on the pavement, the only thing left, Megan pressed her lips together hard and looked at the workbench surface for a moment. I picked it up, Ethan said. It's in my pocket. She didn't say anything. The vest is gone, he said. But the work isn't. You understand what I mean? The work I did making it, that's still in my hands. It's still in everything I've made since. You can't burn what's already inside you. Megan looked up. You really believe that? I have to, he said. Otherwise yesterday wins. She nodded slowly. And then her expression shifted from grief into something sharper, more alert. What did you mean when you told that man he'd made the worst decision of his life? Ethan picked up the coffee again. I meant exactly that. Because of Marcus, of what Marcus represents. He set the cup down. Megan, when I was inside that brotherhood, I understood something about how the world actually works. It's not complicated. Power is real and money is real, and men like Victor Caldwell use both of those things to do whatever they want to whoever they want. And for a long time, in most places, it works. Nobody stops them because nobody can afford to. And so they keep going. He paused, reached under the workbench, and ran his fingers along the carved symbol on the underside of the left rear leg. Just touched it briefly, the way he always did when the pressure was too much. But there are people in this world, he continued, who can't be bought and can't be scared and have resources that have nothing to do with money. And when those people decide that something has gone wrong badly enough to require their attention, everything changes. Everything. He looked at her steadily. Victor Caldwell has never dealt with anything like what's coming. He doesn't know it exists. Megan was quiet for a moment. And you're sure Marcus will actually come? It's been 17 years, Ethan. He said they were coming. But, Megan. He said her name with a particular firmness, not harsh, but clear. In 17 years, I never once called, not once. Marcus knew that someday if I called, it would mean something real. And the moment I told him about the vest, he stopped. He went quiet for a second, and then he asked if I still had the bench with the symbol. Because that symbol is a promise. It means I was here. I was part of this. I haven't forgotten who I am. His jaw tightened slightly. I called. That's the signal that everything I said is true and everything is real, and I need the brotherhood. The rest is not a question. She studied his face. And she believed him, not because she fully understood the world he was describing, but because she understood him, and the certainty in his voice was not the certainty of hope. It was the certainty of someone stating a law of physics. That morning passed in a strange kind of suspended reality. Ethan and Megan cleaned the workshop together, without talking much, swept the glass, moved the broken wood, inventoried what was damaged beyond repair. The display case was a total loss. 3 finished pieces needed to be rebuilt from scratch. The shelf bracket had pulled part of the wall mount out, which would need a proper repair. The cedar box was cracked but salvageable with the right wood glue and some clamp time. Ethan set the cedar box aside for later and kept working. Around 10:30, a man named Gary Sims came in. Gary ran the feed store 2 buildings down, and he was 61 years old and had lived in Red Valley his entire life. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands and looked at the state of the workshop and at Ethan behind the bench. I heard, Gary said. News travels, Ethan said without looking up. I want you to know I'm sorry about what happened. A pause. About what I didn't do. Ethan looked up at him. Gary was not a coward. That was the thing. He was a decent man, a fair man, someone who'd given Ethan his first handshake when he arrived in town 19 years ago and meant it. But he was also a practical man, which meant He had looked at Victor Caldwell's resources and Victor Caldwell's lawyers and the things that had been happening to other small businesses on this street, and he had made the calculation that most people make that getting. He's involved would cost him more than he could afford. You've got a family, Ethan said. That's what I told myself, Gary said. But standing out there yesterday watching that fire, he shook his head. My grandfather built that feed store. My father worked it. I work it. And I watched those men walk away, and I didn't say a word. He looked at Ethan directly. I'm ashamed of that. Ethan held his gaze. Then be different tomorrow, he said. Simply, without accusation. Gary nodded. He put his hat back on. He looked like he was about to say something else, and then thought better of it and left. After he was gone, Megan said quietly, he's not the only. I know. Half this street is scared of Caldwell. The other half has already sold and moved on. I know that too. So what changes it? She asked. Ethan set down the needle. He looked at the empty cedar box on the end of the workbench. Its cracked lid. The tarnished brass of the broken clasp he'd replaced with the burned one. From his pocket, he'd set it there that morning like a marker. Like a reminder. What changes it, he said slowly, is when people stop believing the man with the money makes all the rules. And the only thing that breaks that belief is seeing it broken. He picked up the needle again. That's what's coming. Megan started to answer, and then her phone buzzed on the workbench beside her. She glanced at it, and her expression shifted fast. There's a video, she said. Someone posted it this morning. From yesterday. Ethan looked at her. What video? Someone filmed it. She turned the phone toward him. From across the street. The whole thing. Coal pouring the gas. The fire. You standing in the street. He watched it without touching the phone. It was 22 seconds long, shot from a second-floor window above the diner. Shaky but clear enough. You could see the vest go up. You could see Ethan standing there. You could see Cole walking away with his hands in his pockets like he'd just handled something minor. How many views? Ethan asked. She looked. 14,000. Since this morning. She scrolled. It's getting shared. People are tagging it. Someone posted it to 3 different community groups. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Victor Caldwell doesn't know that video exists, he said finally. Probably not yet. How long before he does? Megan looked at the numbers climbing in real time on her screen. Hours, she said. Maybe less. And right then, Victor Caldwell's morning was about to get considerably more complicated. Because Victor Caldwell was a man who operated on control of information, control of narrative, control of who knew what and when. He had lawyers on retainer for exactly this kind of situation. He had people who monitored local news and social media and flagged anything that could become a problem. He had, over 2 decades of doing exactly this in exactly this way, developed a talent for making problems disappear before they became stories, and stories disappear before they became facts. But he'd never had a problem that already had 14,000 views and was still climbing. He found out about the video at 11:17 that morning from the man who managed his social media presence, who called him in a particular tone of voice that Victor had learned to recognize as the tone reserved for things that required more than a standard response. There's a video, the man said. Victor listened to the description. Take it down. It's already been reshared over 800 times. It's on 4 platforms. We can flag it, but we can't. Take it down. Victor said again. With exactly the same cadence. Because he found that repeating things in the same tone generally made people find ways to do what he needed. Victor. The man's voice was careful. The comments are people are angry. This isn't going to stay local. There are accounts in Billings and Missoula already sharing it. Victor went quiet for a moment. Then, who is this Walker? He's a leather craftsman. He's been on that property for 19 years. There's not much on him publicly. Before Red Valley, there's basically nothing. He's no social media, no public records past a certain point. What point? About 20 years ago. Victor didn't like that. In his experience, when someone had nothing before a certain date, it meant one of 2 things. Either they were very private and very boring, or they had done something serious enough to require starting over entirely. The first type was easy to manage. The second type was unpredictable. Find out who he is, Victor said. Everything. He hung up and stood at his office window and thought about 14,000 views and counting. And the way Cole Briggs had come back yesterday and told him it was handled, Ease. All settled. Ease. Walker would come around within the week. Victor had believed him because Cole had handled things that way before, and it had always worked. He was beginning to understand that this time was different. He just didn't yet understand how different. Meanwhile, in a machine shop outside of Helena, Marcus Bennett was on his third call of the morning. The first had been with Ethan the night before. The second had been with the road captain of the Great Falls chapter, a man named Danny Ortiz, who everyone called Dog for reasons that predated Marcus's leadership and were now simply part of the landscape. The third call was with a woman named Linda Reyes, who was not a member of anything but who had, for 20 years, operated as a kind of informal legal resource for people who needed help with exactly the kind of pressure that Victor Caldwell specialized in applying. "Tell me about Caldwell," Marcus said. Linda's voice was efficient and flat in the way of someone who had spent years making facts navigable. Victor Caldwell, 53, incorporated his development company in Wyoming 18 years ago and then relocated operations to Montana 12 years ago. Since then, his company has been involved in 41 property acquisitions in 4 counties. Of those 41, 19 involved at least one formal complaint to local authorities, code violations, zoning disputes, nuisance claims, harassment allegations. How many of those complaints went anywhere? 3. 2 were settled out of court with NDAs. 1 was dismissed. A pause. He's very good at making problems go away before they become public record. What about the people he bought out? That's where it gets interesting. He could hear her pulling something up on a screen. 23 of his acquisitions involved property owners who initially refused to sell. Of those 23, 21 eventually sold. 2 didn't. Walker's one of the 2? He is now. The other one is a woman named Rose Pittman in Garfield County. 71 years old, runs a roadside restaurant her family built in 1962. Caldwell has been pressuring her for 14 months. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She have any support?" "None that I know of," Marcus said. "What's the most important thing you found?" Linda said, "The financial irregularities." "Tell me." 3 of his acquisitions involved properties that were appraised significantly below market value immediately before Caldwell's company made its purchase offer. In each case, the appraiser who produced the low valuation had a financial relationship with Caldwell's company that wasn't disclosed. Another pause, longer this time. That's fraud, not alleged fraud, actual fraud. Documentable fraud if you have the right documents. Do we? I have 2 of the 3 sets. The third is going to require someone with access to county records in Custer County to pull the originals. I'll get someone there by tomorrow morning, Marcus. Her voice shifted slightly. This is real exposure for Caldwell. If this goes to the right person in the state attorney's office, and I know who the right person is, this becomes a criminal investigation. Not a civil matter. Criminal, that's what I want. I understand, but I want you to understand what you're asking me to be part of here. Linda. His voice was steady. "Ethan, Walker is one of the best men I've ever known. He walked away from everything to build something clean. He spent 19 years building it. And Victor Caldwell sent 3 hired men to burn a piece of leather that Ethan made to honor his dead father." He paused. "I've been patient my entire life about a lot of things. I am done being patient about this particular kind of person." Silence on the line. Then Linda said, "I'll have everything organized by Friday." By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the video of the burning vest had 63,000 views. By 3 o'clock, a journalist from a Billings newspaper had reached out to Megan's phone. She'd been tagged in someone's reshare, asking for a comment from Ethan Walker. Ethan looked at the message when Megan showed him. He read it twice. "Tell them I don't have a comment," he said. "Ethan, this could..." "Tell them I don't have a comment," he said again. "Not yet," because he understood something the journalist didn't. These comments invited responses. Responses invited Victor Caldwell's lawyers. Victor Caldwell's lawyers were very good at turning a victim into a complication. The time for public statements was not now. Now was for other things. Quieter things. Things that moved in a different register entirely. At 4:15, Megan's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. She read it and went very still. "What?" Ethan asked. She turned the phone toward him. The text read, "Tell your boss to be smart." This gets worse for him if he keeps refusing. Ethan looked at it. His jaw tightened. Not much, just enough for Megan to notice. "They know your number," he said. "They went through the workshop's website. My contact info is on the About page." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't entirely. Please? Should I be scared? No, he said, but you should send me a copy of that message and then block the number. Please, what are you going to do with it? Save it. He handed the phone back. Every message, every broken window, every fake code violation, every threatened text, it all goes somewhere, Megan. Nothing disappears. She blocked the number. She sent him the screenshot. She went back to work with the slightly elevated alertness of someone who had just been personally touched by something that until today had felt like Ethan's problem rather than hers. That was the moment the stakes became real for her. Not the burned workshop or the broken glass. Not even the cedar box. The text with her number. The reminder that in Victor Caldwell's world, everyone connected to the obstacle was also an obstacle. At 5:40 in the afternoon, Gary Sims came back. This time he wasn't alone. He had with him Patty Nguyen, who owned the diner across the street, and a man named Robert Cross, who'd had his auto repair shop 3 blocks down and had been dealing with escalating pressure from Caldwell's company for 7 months. And behind them, standing in the doorway of the leather workshop, with their hats and their worries and their collective 20-odd years of Red Valley history, were 4 more people Ethan recognized from a distance of ordinary daily life. We want to help, Gary said. We don't know how, but we want to. Ethan looked at them, all of them. He set down his needle. Sit down, he said, all of you, and he told them what he needed. Not everything, not the part about Marcus or the chapter or what was coming from that direction, but the practical things, documentation of every pressure tactic Caldwell's people had used on each of them. These written accounts, saved messages, photographs of damage, anything they had that proved a pattern. Everything you have that shows this isn't one person's problem, he said. It's everyone's problem. That's what matters right now. Robert Cross said, you think that actually makes a difference? Caldwell's got lawyers that eat documentation for breakfast. He's got lawyers that eat documentation from individual people who are scared and alone, Ethan said. What I'm describing is different. He looked at the table. Victor Caldwell has spent his career making sure nobody sees the full picture. He lets each of you think your situation is separate, that your broken window or your fake code violation or your lowered appraisal is just bad luck, just one thing, just something to get through alone. He looked up. The moment we put the full picture together, it stops being a series of individual incidents. It becomes what it actually is. Which is what? Patty asked. He's a pattern, Ethan said. And patterns have a name in the law. And names in the law have consequences. They stayed for 2 hours. They talked, some of them for the first time, about what Caldwell's people had specifically done to each of them. They compared dates. They compared tactics. Patty had a threatening message on her phone from 8 months ago. Robert had documentation of an appraisal he'd had independently reevaluated and found to be 30% below actual value. Gary had a letter from a zoning official that he'd never fully understood but had saved, and when Ethan read it, he recognized immediately that it referenced a process that was only possible if someone inside the zoning office was cooperating with the developer. By 7 o'clock, Ethan had a file, a real file, physical copies, photograph copies, dates and names and dollar amounts, and a pattern that stretched back further than any of them individually realized. After everyone left, Megan sat across from him in the quiet workshop and looked at the file on the workbench. You knew this was coming, she said. You didn't call Marcus because they burned the vest. He looked at her. You called Marcus because you'd been planning this for weeks. Maybe longer, she said it without accusation. The vest was the last line, the thing you weren't willing to let go. And when they crossed it, it was the signal, not just to yourself, but to whoever you called, that everything was in place. He held her gaze for a long moment. The vest was real, he said. That wasn't strategy. I know, she said. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm saying you're not someone who makes one phone call and hopes for the best. You'd already been preparing for the moment when this became too much to handle quietly. She looked at the file. And you'd already been building this. He was quiet for a moment. Then the documentation. Yes, I've been collecting that for 2 months. But the call to Marcus, that was grief, real grief, and real anger, and the knowledge of what was coming next was beyond what I could handle as one quiet man in a workshop. So both things are true. Both things are true. She nodded slowly, and then she said something that surprised him. Your father would have been proud of you today. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face. Not much, but enough. He would have been angrier than I am, Ethan said. Probably, she agreed, but proud. He picked up the needle again. The light in the workshop was low and golden now, the particular late-day light of early fall in Montana, and it caught the leather on the bench and the tools on the wall and the empty cedar box with its cracked lid and the small burned brass clasp sitting on top of it like a period at the end of a sentence. Outside, on the highway that ran north through Red Valley and then up through the mountains toward the rest of the state, 3 motorcycles crested a hill at 60 miles an hour and began the long descent toward town. They weren't the first, they weren't the last. Ease. But they were the beginning of something Victor Caldwell couldn't buy his way out of, couldn't lawyer his way around, couldn't redirect with a check or a threat, or a man named Cole Briggs with a red gasoline can. In his office, in the nicest building in Red Valley's neighboring town, Victor sat with his phone and a drink, and the knowledge that 63,000 people had watched one of his hired men pour gasoline on a leather vest in broad daylight. His lawyer had called it manageable. Victor wasn't sure he believed that anymore. And Ethan Walker sat in his workshop as the last light fell, stitching the final panels of a jacket for a rancher in Billings who would never fully know what the hands that made it had once been capable of. The brothers were on the road, the file was on the table, and Red Valley was about to discover that the quietest man on the main street had roots that ran deeper than anything Victor Caldwell had ever thought to look for. The first sound came just before 7 the next morning. Megan heard it from two blocks away as she walked to the workshop with coffee in both hands, a low, steady rumble that she felt in her chest before she fully registered it with her ears. Not thunder. The sky was clear and pale blue and cold the way Montana mornings get in early fall. Not a truck or machinery or anything mechanical she could immediately place. She stopped on the sidewalk and listened. The rumble grew. Deepened, multiplied, and then she turned the corner onto the main street and understood. There were motorcycles parked in front of the leather workshop. Not 3, not 5. 14, stretched in a line from Ethan's door past the feed store. Past the gap where a closed-down insurance office used to be. Nearly to the intersection. Big machines, road-worn but maintained with the particular care that serious riders gave to serious machines. Black leather, chrome that caught the morning light. And standing or sitting near those motorcycles, talking in low voices with coffee cups from the gas station down the block, were men who carried themselves the way Megan had seen Ethan carry himself, like people who had decided, a long time ago, exactly how much space in this world they were entitled to take up, and had never revised that number downward. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. One of the men closest to her, broad-shouldered, 50s, a gray beard trimmed close, and a jaw that looked like it had taken its share of impact over the years, looked over at her. His expression was neutral, assessing, not unfriendly. "You, Megan?" She blinked. "Yes, Ethan's inside," he said. "He said to send you straight in." She walked past the row of motorcycles and pushed open the workshop door and found Ethan at the workbench with a man she had never seen before, but recognized immediately from the way he occupied the room. He was maybe 50, built solid through the chest and shoulders, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes that were light brown and very still and absolutely direct. He wore a leather vest over a plain black shirt, and he was sitting on the stool across from Ethan the way old friends sit comfortably, without ceremony. Like the 17 years since they'd last been in the same room was a detail rather than a weight. Ethan looked up when Megan came in. "Marcus, this is Megan Carter. She runs this place with me." Marcus Bennett Ironwolf, chapter president, the man Ethan had called 2 nights ago, turned and looked at Megan with the same directness he'd presumably directed at everything in his life. "Ethan told me about you," Marcus said. "Said you've got good hands." "He told me almost nothing about you," Megan said. "Until yesterday." Marcus looked at Ethan. Something passed between them, not quite amusement, but close to it. "That sounds right," Marcus said. Megan put the coffees on the bench and pulled up the other stool. She wasn't leaving. Ethan didn't ask her to. "How many came?" she asked. "Right now, 14, Marcus said. "More coming through today." "By tonight, we're looking at 60, maybe 70 from the Montana charter alone." "I've had calls from Wyoming and Idaho. Some of the brothers from Washington said they want to make the ride." He paused. "Word traveled fast," Ethan said. "Not just the video. That video is what the general public saw. Inside the Brotherhood, what traveled was your name. And what it meant when you made a call." Marcus looked at his coffee cup for a moment. Ethan, I've been doing this for 17 years without you. Running this charter, keeping things straight, making sure we take care of our own. I don't say that to make you feel guilty. I say it so you understand when you called every man I've spoken to in the last 2 days reacted the same way. Like something that had been missing got found. He looked up. You were that to us. You were that kind of person. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I didn't call because I wanted to be that again. I know. I called because they crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, Marcus said. I know that too. He glanced at the cedar box on the end of the workbench, the cracked lid, the burned brass clasp sitting on top. He looked at it for a moment without speaking. When he looked back, his expression had changed in a way Megan couldn't entirely name, not softer, exactly, but deeper. Your father was a good man. What he meant to you. What he meant to the people who knew him. He shook his head slowly. These men had no idea what they touched. No, Ethan agreed. They didn't. They're going to find out. The door opened and 2 more men came in. Road Captain Danny Ortiz, who went by dog and had the compact energy of someone who was always calculating 3 moves ahead, and a younger man named Jesse, who was lean and quiet and apparently functioned as Marcus's informal shadow. Dog put a folded piece of paper on the workbench. Financial records, he said. Linda's 3rd set. Someone went to Custer County this morning at 5:30. Pulled originals. Ethan unfolded it. Read it without expression. Handed it to Marcus. Marcus read it, folded it, and put it in his vest. That's the 3rd appraisal fraud, he said to Ethan. Linda was right. What does that mean in real terms? Megan asked. Marcus looked at her. It means Victor Caldwell has committed fraud in 3 separate property transactions in 3 separate counties. It means the pattern is provable. It means when this goes to the right person in the state attorney's office, which Linda is making happen, it becomes a criminal investigation, not a dispute between neighbors. He paused. And it means every person Caldwell has pressured in the last decade suddenly has standing. Megan thought about Gary Sims and Patty Nguyen and Robert Cross and the 4 other people who'd sat in this workshop the night before and talked for 2 hours about what had been done to them. About dates and messages and appraisals and threatening letters. Ethan has a file, she said. Dog looked at Ethan. The Red Valley documentation. 7 businesses, Ethan said. 2 years of pressure tactics. I spent the evening organizing it. Dog picked it up from the shelf behind the workbench where Ethan had set it. He opened it, went through it, and looked up with an expression that was something between professional approval and anger. This is solid. This is really solid, he looked at Ethan. You've been building this for a while. 2 months, Ethan said. I knew this wasn't going to stay quiet. It never does with men like Caldwell. They don't stop until something stops them. Outside, the rumble of arriving motorcycles started again. Megan moved to the window without thinking and looked out. 3 more had just pulled in, and behind them, coming down the main road from the north, she could see the shapes of more headlights in the morning air, that deep chest-felt sound growing again. Red Valley's Main Street had never sounded like this. Inside the diner across the road, Patty Nguyen had come to the window with a dish towel in her hands and was staring. 3 doors down, Gary Sims stood in the feed store doorway, watching the bikes line up with an expression somewhere between awe and relief. A couple of younger locals had stopped on the sidewalk and pulled out their phones. And in his truck, which was parked on a side street 3 blocks from the workshop, Cole Briggs sat very still and watched the motorcycles arrive and reached slowly for his own phone. He called Victor Caldwell on the 3rd ring. We have a problem, Cole said. Victor was in his kitchen, reading his morning briefing. Handle it. Victor Cole's voice was careful in a way it hadn't been in 6 years of working for this man. I don't think you understand what I'm looking at. Then explain it to me. Cole looked through the windshield at the main street of Red Valley, at the row of motorcycles that now stretched a full block. At the men standing near them, talking, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. The Hells Angels are here, he said. Not a few of them. A lot of them. And more are coming. Silence on the other end. Cole, Victor said, and his voice had changed register. Just slightly. But Cole, who had worked for this man for 6 years, heard it. Tell me you're not serious. I counted 32 bikes as of 5 minutes ago, Cole said. I'm watching 3 more come down the main road right now. A pause. And they're going into Walker's workshop. Victor Caldwell, who had spent 2 decades building a development empire through a combination of money, legal pressure, ease, intimidation, ease, and the strategic deployment of men like Kolb Briggs, ease, had in those 2 decades encountered various forms of resistance. Ease, business owners who lawyered up, community groups who organized, journalists who wrote unflattering stories, politicians who briefly cared before other things pulled their attention away. Ease. He had never had to consider what it meant when the man he was trying to remove from a property turned out to have 100 bikers who crossed state lines to stand in his corner. Ease. Get out of there, Victor said quietly. Don't engage. Come back here, what do we do? I need to think, Victor said. Ease. And hung up. Inside the workshop, none of this was known yet. Ethan was talking with Marcus and Dog about the logistics of the next 48 hours. He wanted this done correctly, not as a show of force, not as intimidation, not in any way that could be framed as threatening or illegal. He had thought carefully, over the years since he left the Brotherhood, about the line between power used rightly and power misused, and he was not willing to cross it now, not even against a man who deserved every consequence coming to him. This goes through proper channels, Ethan said. The documentation goes to Linda. Linda takes it to the AG's office. We don't approach Caldwell. We don't approach his people. The brothers are here as a presence, as community support, as a statement that this man does not operate in a vacuum and there are people watching. Marcus nodded, agreed. And Rose Pittman, Ethan said. Dog looked up from the file he was reading. The woman in Garfield County. She's been dealing with this for 14 months alone. She needs to know she's not alone. He looked at Marcus. Can someone go? Already sent 2 brothers this morning, Marcus said. They left at 6. Ethan looked at him. You already knew about her. Linda told me everything she told you. I just had an 8-hour head start. A slight lift at the corner of Marcus's mouth. The closest thing to a smile that had appeared in the workshop this morning. Did you think I spent 17 years not knowing how to put things in order? Ethan held his gaze for a moment, and something shifted between them, the weight of 17 years. The gap of all that time, the complicated gratitude of a man who had walked away from something and found it still there when he needed it. No, Ethan said quietly. I knew you could. The morning moved fast after that. By 9 o'clock, 47 motorcycles were parked on the main street of Red Valley. The town had never seen anything like it, and the town's reaction was complicated and layered in the way that small towns are when something large arrives in their midst. There was unease because 47 motorcycles with Hells Angels members attached to them would produce unease in any community, regardless of context. There was fascination because people had phones and the video was already viral, and now here was the next chapter of the story happening right outside the diner window. And there was something else, something harder to name, a kind of collective shift in the air, the feeling of a weight that had been pressing down for months, suddenly having something push back against it. Patty Nguyen crossed the street at 9:15 with a tray of coffees and a look of determination on her face. Dog saw her coming from the window and said to Marcus, "Woman incoming." "These coffees. Looks like she means business." Marcus said to Ethan, "Friend?" "She owns the diner," Ethan said. "She was here last night. She's got documentation on Caldwell going back 8 months. Then she's useful," Dog said. "She's also just a good person," Megan said from the corner, without looking up from the invoices she'd been sorting. "Let's try to remember both things can be true." Dog looked at her. "I like her," he said to Ethan. "I know," Ethan said. "So do I." Patty came in with the coffees and set them on the counter and looked around the workshop, at Ethan, at Marcus, at Dog and Jesse, and the 2 other men who'd come inside, and she didn't look frightened at all. She looked like a woman who had been frightened for 8 months and had just located something in herself that was done with it. "My grandmother came to this country from Vietnam with $40 and a sewing machine," Patty said to nobody in particular and everybody at once. "She built that diner from a food cart. My mother ran it for 30 years. I've been running it for 9. Victor Caldwell sent a man in a gray suit to tell me I should sell before things got complicated." She paused. "I want to know what I can do." Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me exactly what that man in the gray suit said. Word for word, if you remember it." She remembered it. She remembered all of it. They talked for 40 minutes. At 10:30, Ethan's burner phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. He picked it up. "Mr. Walker," said a voice he didn't know, male. "Careful," with the professional neutrality of someone accustomed to managing difficult conversations. "My name is Philip Grant. I'm an attorney representing Victor Caldwell's interests." "Go ahead," Ethan said. Megan looked up. Marcus went still. My client is prepared to make a revised offer for your property, Philip Grant said. He's significantly above the previous figure. He also wanted me to convey that yesterday's incident, the situation with your property, was unauthorized. He was not informed that would happen and does not condone that kind of approach. Ethan said nothing for a moment, let the silence sit. Mr. Walker. I heard you, Ethan said. Tell your client the property is not for sale. I understand your position. But I also want you to note, for your records, that this call is being recorded. He wasn't recording it, but saying it was worthwhile, and that I consider this call an attempt to negotiate away the consequences of criminal conduct, which I'll be documenting and passing to the appropriate legal authorities. He paused. Is there anything else? A longer silence on the other end. Mr. Walker, I think it would be in everyone's interest to... Goodbye, Mr. Grant, Ethan said, and ended the call. The workshop was very quiet. Marcus said he panicked. He's calculating, Ethan said. He knows the video exists. He knows about the brothers in town. He doesn't know about the documentation yet, or the AG's office. He's trying to close this down before it gets bigger. Too late, Dog said. Way too late, Megan agreed. And it was. But nobody in the workshop was celebrating yet because men like Victor Caldwell didn't stop when they were surprised. They regrouped, they redirected, they found the angle that worked. And the real question that lived under everything happening in this workshop on this morning was what angle Victor Caldwell would find next. The answer came at 11:45. It came not through Ethan's phone or Marcus's phone or Megan's phone. It came through the front door of the workshop when Jesse, the quiet young man who had been Marcus's shadow all morning, came in from outside where he'd been keeping a general eye on the street and said, Marcus, 2 police cruisers just parked at the end of the block. Everyone in the workshop looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Marcus. Caldwell called in a favor, Marcus said, probably. Ethan stood. I'll go out. I'll go with you, Marcus said. No, firm, not harsh. I go alone. That's important. If I go out there with you beside me, it becomes a confrontation. If I go out there alone, it's a man talking to local law enforcement. Let me do this right. Marcus held his gaze for a moment, then sat back. All right. Ethan walked out of the workshop and down the steps to the street where 2 Red Valley police cruisers had parked at the corner. The officer getting out of the first one was a man named Deputy Hale, late 40s, lean, someone Ethan recognized from 19 years of polite local interaction. The kind of lawman who was generally decent, but who also understood which way the political wind was blowing in a county where Victor Caldwell had been a significant presence for 12 years. Deputy Hale looked at the row of motorcycles and then at Ethan. And he said, Morning, Terry, Ethan said. We got a call, Hale said. Concern about an unlawful gathering. Possible intimidation of local residents. Ethan kept his voice even. Who made the call? Anonymous. No gathering is happening, Ethan said. Some friends came to visit me and they parked their motorcycles legally on a public street. Nobody has been approached, threatened, or interfered with. Everything is within the law. Hale looked along the row of motorcycles. 47 of them. The men near them, talking quietly, coffee cups in hand. Ethan, Hale said quietly. Not into his radio. Just between them. I know what happened to you 2 days ago. I saw the video. And I want you to know he stopped. Started again. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry nobody was there. Ethan looked at him. Something real passed across Ethan's face. Something that acknowledged what the apology cost. There are things you can do now, Ethan said, if you want to. Hale raised an eyebrow. Like what? Like taking an official report about the destruction of property and arson of personal goods at my workshop 2 days ago. With names, he paused. Cole Briggs and the 2 men who came with him. I'll give you full descriptions and I know someone who can give you their plates. Hale was quiet for a moment. He looked at the street, at the workshop, at Ethan. Do you want to come to the station and do that? He said. I want to do it right now, Ethan said, while you're here. With your body camera on. Hale looked at him for another moment. Then he reached up and pressed the button on his body camera. Go ahead, he said, Ethan told him. Systematically, clearly, with dates and times and names and descriptions. He told it without anger, without exaggeration, without anything that could be later questioned. When he was done, Hale had 3 pages of notes and a recording that, by law, was now part of the official record. I'll also need you to take reports from 6 other business owners on this street, Ethan said. Each of them has documentation of pressure tactics used against them by Victor Caldwell's company. Would you be available this afternoon for those? Hale looked at the second cruiser, at the other officer inside it who hadn't gotten out. Yes. He looked back at Ethan. Yes, he said, I would. Yes. The two cruisers left 10 minutes later, without ticketing anyone, without filing an unlawful gathering report, without doing a single thing that Victor Caldwell had called to arrange. Marcus was at the window of the workshop watching when Ethan came back in. What happened? Marcus asked. He took the report, Ethan said. He's coming back this afternoon to take reports from the other businesses. He sat back down at the workbench, picked up the needle. Terry Hale is not a bad man. He was just scared of making the wrong choice. Sometimes people need someone to show them which way to step. Dog was sitting against the back wall with his phone out. Linda just texted, he said. She's got a meeting at the AG's office confirmed for Monday. She's bringing the full financial documentation. He looked up. Monday, Ethan. 4 days. The AG's office in 4 days. Megan let out a breath she'd apparently been holding for a while. Marcus said nothing. He was watching Ethan stitch, the particular movement of the needle, the steady pull of the thread. He watched it, the way someone watches a thing they haven't seen in a long time and didn't realize they'd missed. You never stopped, Marcus said. Ethan looked up briefly, then back at the leather. Stop what who you are. You left us. You came here. You made. He gestured at the workshop. But you never stopped being the person who thinks 3 moves ahead, who builds the file before he needs it, who knows exactly how to talk to a deputy so the deputy goes home feeling like he made the right choice. He paused. You just redirected it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, working the stitch. Then my father used to say, that character is what you do with your hands when nobody's watching. He meant leather. He meant the work. He pulled the thread taut. But I think it's broader than that. The afternoon brought more arrivals. By 2 o'clock, 61 motorcycles were parked on the main street of Red Valley. The video of the burning vest had passed 200,000 views. A reporter from the Billings Gazette, not the one who'd texted Megan the day before, a different one, more experienced, arrived and set up outside on the sidewalk and began talking to people. Not to the bikers specifically, to the business owners, to Gary Sims and Patty Wynn and Robert Cross and the others who had been in the workshop the night before. They were talking now, freely, specifically, on record. Victor Caldwell's lawyer called Ethan 2 more times that afternoon. Ethan did not pick up. At 4:15, something happened that changed the temperature of the whole situation. Jesse came into the workshop and said 3 words, Cole Briggs is back. Everyone looked at him. Where? Marcus said. End of the street. He's in his truck. He's been sitting there for 40 minutes. Marcus looked at Ethan. Ethan set down the needle. He thought for a moment. He's watching. Caldwell sent him to watch and report back. He paused. Let him watch. You know, Ethan said. What he sees out there is 61 motorcycles and a reporter interviewing business owners and a deputy who came and went without doing anything Caldwell wanted. He looked at Marcus steadily. What he sees out there is the thing Victor Caldwell does not know how to fight. Let him see it. Let him go back and describe it, Dog said quietly. From the corner, beautiful. And it was, in its way. Because Cole Briggs, sitting in his truck at the end of the street, watching the thing he'd helped create the consequence chain he'd set in motion when he poured gasoline on a leather vest, was its own particular justice. A justice that didn't require a fist or a threat. Just the weight of reality arriving exactly where it was supposed to. Cole sat there for 2 more hours. Then he drove away. At 7 that evening, Marcus and Ethan sat alone in the workshop for the first time since Marcus had arrived. The others had gone to arrange accommodations. 2 of the local businesses had offered space, and a man named Frank, who ran a small motel 3 miles out of town, had shown up midday and said he'd take anyone who needed a room at cost because he'd seen the video and he knew what it meant for Red Valley. The workshop was quiet. The tools on the wall, the leather on the bench. The cracked cedar box with its burned brass clasp. Marcus looked at it. I'm going to make you a new one, Ethan said. Marcus looked at him. The vest, not the same. You can't make the same thing twice. But something. Ethan ran his hand along the edge of the workbench. Something that holds what it was supposed to hold. You don't have to, Ethan said, when this is done. When this is finished and the town is clear of Caldwell and the AG has what it needs, and Rose Pittman in Garfield County knows she's safe. He paused. Then I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make something. And it's going to be for my father, Because the things they burned, he stopped. His voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. They burned the leather. They didn't burn what I know about him. They didn't burn what he taught me. That's still here. He pressed his hand flat against his chest briefly, just for a second. It's still here. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, your father knew what he raised, maybe. Ethan said, not maybe. Marcus looked at him directly. He knew. Outside, on the main street of Red Valley. 61 motorcycles stood in the fall air, patient as stones. Inside the diner across the street. Patty Wynne was still at it. Talking to the reporter from the Gazette. Her hands moving as she spoke. Telling a story she had held inside herself for 8 months and was not going to hold inside herself anymore. Victor Caldwell was in his office making calls that weren't going the way he needed them to go. His lawyer had stopped calling Ethan's number. His social media manager had quietly resigned. And somewhere in the state attorney general's office, a calendar had a new appointment blocked out for Monday morning with a name attached to it that Victor Caldwell would not hear until the weekend was almost over, when it would already be too late to do anything about it. Red Valley was no longer quiet. And Ethan Walker, the man nobody in this town had noticed for 19 years, the quiet craftsman with the locked cedar box and the steady hands and the carved symbol on the underside of the workbench leg, was at the center of all of it. Not because he wanted to be, because someone had burned the wrong thing. Saturday morning came in cold and bright, and Red Valley woke up different. It wasn't just the motorcycles, though they were still there. 61 of them parked in a line that had become, overnight, something of a landmark. People were driving in from neighboring towns to see them. A family from 40 miles out had stopped, and the father had gotten out and stood on the sidewalk, looking at the row of bikes with the particular expression of a man who had seen the viral video and needed to confirm with his own eyes that the story was real. It was real, all of it. What had changed overnight was harder to define, but easier to feel. It was in the way Gary Sims opened the feed store at 7:30 and left the door propped wide the way he used to before Caldwell's pressure started, before he'd gotten into the habit of keeping things closed and small and contained. It was in the way Patty crossed the street at 8 with muffins for the brothers keeping watch. She'd been up since 5 baking, which was what Patty did when she had too much feeling and needed somewhere to put it. It was in the way 3 people Ethan had never spoken to directly stopped him on the sidewalk before 9 and told him they were sorry and asked if there was anything they could do. Red Valley was breathing differently, and in a hotel suite 30 miles away, Victor Caldwell was not sleeping. He'd been awake since 3 in the morning, which was not something that happened to Victor Caldwell. Victor was a man who prided himself on sleeping well. It was a discipline he'd cultivated alongside his business instincts, the ability to set a problem down at the end of the day and pick it up fresh in the morning. He'd always believed that men who couldn't sleep were men who couldn't control their circumstances. And Victor had spent 20 years controlling his circumstances with such thoroughness that sleep had never been a difficulty. Until now. His lawyer Philip Grant had called at midnight with news that the Billings Gazette was running a feature piece in Sunday's edition. Not a small item. A full feature, with interviews from 6 Red Valley business owners, documentation of pressure tactics, a timeline of Caldwell's acquisition history in the county, and a quote from a former employee of one of Caldwell's shell companies who had, apparently been waiting for exactly this moment to say what he knew. How bad? Victor had asked. Philip had been quiet for a moment in the way that lawyers are quiet when they are deciding how honest to be. Victor, he said, I've been your attorney for 9 years. I need you to let me be honest with you right now. Then be honest. The documentation these people have assembled is more comprehensive than anything I've seen in a civil context. The appraisal records alone, the 3 fraudulent appraisals in 3 counties, that's not civil exposure. That's criminal exposure. And if someone has taken that to the AG's office, has someone taken it to the AG's office? Another careful pause. My sources tell me there's a meeting scheduled for Monday. Victor had sat with that for a long moment. Then who put this together? Walker, Philip said, but not Walker alone. He had help. Significant help. A pause. Victor, the Hells Angels have a woman named Linda Reyes who works with them informally on legal matters. She's sharp. She's been doing this for 20 years. She assembled the financial documentation, and she's the one with the AG's office connection. Victor said nothing. There's something else, Philip said. Please tell me, Cole Briggs, the incident with the vest. There's a formal police report now. Deputy Hale took it Thursday afternoon. Briggs is named specifically, and the two men with him. The body camera footage from Hale's conversation with Walker is on record. Another pause. Cole is exposed, Victor. And if Cole is exposed, and if Cole decides that the most favorable outcome for Cole is to cooperate with investigator. Cole won't talk, Victor said immediately. Philip said nothing. Which itself a statement. Victor had hung up and sat in the dark of his hotel suite and thought about Cole Briggs with the particular focused discomfort of a man who was realizing that the person he trusted most to handle things quietly was now the most dangerous variable in a rapidly deteriorating equation. By 8 Saturday morning, Cole Briggs was not answering his phone. In the workshop, Ethan knew none of the details of Victor's sleepless night, but he understood the shape of it intuitively. He'd seen men like Victor before, not in real estate, not in the development business, but in other arenas where power and money and the willingness to use people as instruments all converged. He knew what it looked like when that kind of man started to feel the structure underneath him shift. He knew the moves they made, the desperate pivot, the preemptive reframe, the attempt to define the narrative before the narrative defined them. He was waiting for it. It came at 9:45 in the form of a press release. Dog brought it in on his phone and read it aloud without commentary, which was its own kind of commentary. Victor Caldwell's company had issued a statement expressing deep regret over recent events in Red Valley, condemning in the strongest possible terms any unauthorized actions taken by third parties. Announcing the immediate termination of its relationship with the contractors responsible, pledging a full internal review. And in the final paragraph, almost as an aside, announcing a new community investment initiative that would allocate $300,000 to small business support in the county. $300,000. The workshop was quiet for a moment after Dog finished reading. Then Megan said, "He thinks this is still fixable." "He's wrong," Marcus said. "He doesn't know that yet," Ethan said. He was at the workbench, hands flat on the surface, thinking. He's done this before, and it worked before. Issue the statement. Cut loose the people who got caught. Throw money at the community. Let the news cycle move on. He paused. The difference this time is the documentation, the appraisal fraud. That doesn't go away with a press release and $300,000. That's already in a file that's going to land on a desk in the AG's office Monday morning, regardless of what he says today. Dog was nodding. Linda confirmed an hour ago. The meeting is locked. She's presenting in person. Does Caldwell know? Marcus asked. His lawyer suspects it, Ethan said. That's why the press release went out this morning. He's trying to establish a good faith narrative before Monday. He looked at Marcus. It won't work. What do we do with the press release? Megan asked. Nothing, Ethan said. We don't respond. We don't comment. We let it sit there and look like what it is. He looked at her steadily. A man who got caught trying to buy his way out. At 10:30, something happened that none of them had anticipated. Rose Pittman called. Ethan's burner phone rang, and the number that came up was one he recognized because Marcus had sent it to him 2 days ago, the number of the two brothers who'd driven to Garfield County to find her. But the voice on the other end wasn't one of the brothers. It was a woman, 71 years old, a voice like gravel and warm bread, someone who had clearly spent decades saying exactly what she meant. Mr. Walker, she said. My name is Rose Pittman. I believe you know who I am. I do, Ethan said. He put the phone on speaker so Marcus could hear. How are you, Miss Pittman? I've been better, she said, without self-pity. I've also been a lot worse. Those two young men you sent are currently eating more of my pie than is strictly reasonable, but I appreciate the company. A pause. I want to tell you something. Go ahead. I've been fighting Victor Caldwell for 14 months, she said. Alone. My daughter wanted me to sell. My pastor suggested I consider what the stress was doing to my health. My accountant told me the numbers didn't justify the fight. Her voice was steady, unhurried. And I kept thinking if I sell, the restaurant is gone. My mother's restaurant, my grandmother's restaurant. 107 recipes handwritten in a book that my grandmother brought from Saigon. It doesn't exist anywhere else. She paused. You understand what I mean by that? Yes, Ethan said, I do. Those young men told me what you built. What you did, what they burned. Her voice shifted slightly, not softer, exactly, but more direct. I want you to know something, Mr. Walker. I've been praying for 14 months for one sign that I wasn't completely alone in this. One sign that there was someone else in this state who understood what it means when a man with money decides that what belongs to you is less important than what he wants. A pause. You were that sign. Ethan said nothing for a moment. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on the workbench. Miss Pittman, he said finally, you're not alone. Not anymore. I know that now. A brief pause. Those young men also told me about the meeting Monday with the Attorney General's office. Yes, they said my documentation, 14 months of it, would be useful. It would be very useful, Ethan said. It extends the pattern. It shows Caldwell has been doing this across multiple counties over a longer period than we can document from Red Valley alone. Then I'll send it, she said. All of it. I've kept everything. Every letter, every threat, every visit from men in expensive shoes. I kept it all. Because my mother always said that the person who keeps the paperwork is the person who wins in the end. A pause. Ethan could hear the smile in her voice. She was a very practical woman. After they hung up, Marcus sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, 14 months. Alone. Yeah, Ethan said. And she held. Marcus shook his head slowly. What is it about these people? Not a complaint. Not dismissal. Genuine wondering. The kind of wondering that comes from respect. The Pittmans, the Nguyens, your father. He looked at Ethan. They just hold. They have something worth holding for, Ethan said. That's all it is. When you know exactly what you're protecting, it's easier to stay standing. The press release had hit social media by 11 that morning, and the response was not what Victor Caldwell's communications team had hoped for. The 6 business owners who had talked to the Gazette reporter were now online, in comment sections and community groups and on their own accounts, in their own voices, saying, and specifically what Caldwell's company had done to them. Rose Pittman's daughter, who had previously urged her mother to sell, posted a photograph of the family restaurant with a caption that got shared 4,000 times by noon. The narrative had moved beyond Victor's ability to shape it. At 12:30, Cole Briggs finally answered his phone. Not Victor's calls, not Philip Grant's calls. He answered a call from a number he'd never seen before, a number that turned out to belong to an investigator from the state attorney general's office who had been trying to reach him since Friday evening. Cole Briggs sat in the parking lot of a gas station 40 miles from Red Valley and talked to that investigator for 1 hour and 17 minutes. Nobody in the workshop knew this was happening in real time. But Marcus got a text at 1:15 from Linda Reyes that said only, the third man is talking. He showed it to Ethan without saying anything. Ethan read it. Set the phone down, picked up his needle, he said. And went back to work. Dog couldn't help himself. That's it? Good? What else do you want me to say? I want you to act like this is significant. It is significant, Ethan said. It's also what was always going to happen. Men like Cole Briggs are not loyal, they're employed. There's a difference. He pulled the thread through. The moment it became more dangerous to stay silent than to talk, he was going to talk. That was always the way this ended for him. Marcus was watching him. You knew that from the beginning. I knew that from the moment I saw his eyes in this workshop, Ethan said. He wasn't a true believer. He was a tool. And tools can always be repurposed. He looked up briefly. Victor Caldwell made his entire empire out of tools he thought he owned. He's about to find out the difference between owning someone and employing them. The afternoon accelerated. At 2 o'clock, the Gazette piece went live online 12 hours ahead of its Sunday print deadline. Because the editor had looked at the story, and the video, and the press release, and Rose Pittman's daughter's post, and made the editorial decision that waiting until Sunday was waiting too long. It ran under the headline, Pattern of Intimidation, How One Developer Quietly Dismantled Small-Town Montana. By 3 o'clock, it had been read 40,000 times. By 3:30, 2 more journalists had arrived in Red Valley. A television crew from a billing station pulled up outside the workshop at 4. Ethan spoke to them for 7 minutes on the sidewalk, calm, clear, specific. He did not mention Marcus or the Hells Angels by name. He talked about his workshop, his father's vest, the documentation, the other businesses, and Rose Pittman in Garfield County. He said the words pattern and fraud and community in a way that was factual rather than inflammatory. The segment aired at 5. Victor Caldwell watched it from his hotel suite and understood, in the way that men sometimes understand things too late, that the ground he'd been standing on had not just shifted. It had been pulled out from underneath him entirely. And the thing that had pulled it, the thing he had not seen coming, not in any of his calculations, was not the bikers, not the documentation, not the journalist or the deputy or Linda Reyes. It was Ethan Walker, specifically the quality of Ethan Walker's patience. The 19 years of building a real life in a real town among real people. The 2 years of making a vest for a dead father, the 2 months of quietly assembling documentation, the single phone call made at the exact right moment. The absolute refusal, at every stage, to be moved by money or fear or the fire in the street. Victor had spent 20 years identifying people's vulnerabilities and exploiting them. He had looked at Ethan Walker and seen a man with one vulnerability, the workshop, the land, the life he'd built, and he'd moved against it with the confidence of someone who had done this before and always won. What he hadn't understood, what he couldn't have understood, because it required a knowledge of Ethan's history that nobody in Red Valley had possessed, was that the man's real strength wasn't the workshop. It wasn't even the brotherhood. It was the quality of his character that had made the brotherhood want to ride 500 miles to stand in his corner. That was not a thing Victor Caldwell knew how to fight. He didn't have a strategy for it. He didn't have a lawyer for it. He didn't have a check large enough to address it. At 5:45, Philip Grant called Victor and said 4 words that ended the conversation. Victor, I'm stepping down. Victor sat with a dead phone in his hand for a long time. In the workshop, Ethan didn't know about any of this in real time. He was sitting across the workbench from Marcus in the quiet of the early evening. And they were talking, really talking, the way they hadn't talked in 17 years. About things that had happened, and people who were gone, and choices that had been made, and what those choices had cost. Do you regret it? Marcus asked, leaving. Ethan thought about it for a real moment, not a reflexive one. No, he said. I needed to leave. Who I was becoming inside the brotherhood, not because of the brotherhood, because of my own grief, my own anger that person was going to do something I couldn't take back. He paused. I left to protect the things I cared about from the version of myself that was emerging. He's in here, Marcus said. Did it work? Mostly, Ethan said. The anger's still there. It never goes all the way. But I learned what to do with it. You can pour anger into leather work the same way you pour anything into craft. It becomes something useful. Something real. He looked at his hands. My father taught me that. He taught me that the best thing you can do with a feeling that's too big to handle is to put it into something with your hands. Make something with it. Otherwise, it just eats you. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I thought about coming to find you, he said. Over the years, a few times. Why didn't you? Because you needed the space. He looked at the workbench. And because part of me understood that you leaving the way you did, completely cleanly, was the bravest thing I'd ever seen you do. And I didn't want to undermine it by showing up. A pause. But I thought about it. I know, Ethan said quietly. They sat with that. Megan came in at 6 with food from Patty's Diner, enough for everyone, which turned out to be a significant quantity. Because by 6, the workshop had become an informal gathering calming point for people Ethan had known at various distances for 19 years. Gary was there, and Robert Cross, and 2 of the brothers who'd come down from Great Falls, and Frank from the motel, who had apparently decided he was part of this now, and nobody had objected. They ate together in the workshop among the leather and the tools and the smell of linseed oil. They didn't talk about Victor Caldwell specifically. They talked about Red Valley, about the town as it had been, and as it had become under the shadow of Caldwell's pressure, and as it might be now. About what could be rebuilt, about what had never actually been lost, just compressed. At 7:30, Dog came back in from outside where he'd been on his phone and stood in the doorway with an expression that made everyone stop talking. What? Marcus said. Dog looked at Ethan. You know a man named Leonard Walsh, runs a property law firm in Helena? Ethan shook his head. He reached out to Linda 20 minutes ago, Dog said. He's been Victor Caldwell's personal property attorney for 11 years. He's not stepping down, he's flipping. He paused. He says he has documentation of 15 additional fraudulent transactions that Caldwell's company concealed from him, things done behind his back using his firm's name. He's furious. He wants to meet with the AG's office himself. The room went completely quiet. Then Gary Sims, who was not a dramatic man and had never in 19 years of knowing Ethan said anything particularly memorable, said, well, I'll be damned. And something in the room broke open, not laughter exactly, but something in the neighborhood of it. The particular release that comes when a weight that's been pressing down for too long suddenly lifts by exactly the amount you needed it to. Ethan didn't laugh. He sat very still. He pressed his hand flat on the workbench for just a moment, not reaching for the symbol this time, just resting. He's just feeling the solid wood under his palm. That's it, he said quietly. He's mostly to himself. That's the whole picture. Marcus heard him. You okay? Ethan looked up. His eyes were bright in a way they hadn't been since, before the vest burned, not with grief this time, not with anger. With something that took him a moment to identify because he hadn't felt it in a long time. Yeah, he said, I'm okay, and he meant it. Sunday came. The Gazette piece in print landed on doorsteps across 4 counties with a photograph on the front page that a staff photographer had taken without asking anyone's permission or needing to a wide shot of the main street of Red Valley. 61 motorcycles in a line. And in the middle of them, standing at the door of the leather workshop in his canvas apron with his hands at his sides, Ethan Walker. The caption read, "A community stands together." Victor Caldwell's phone rang 43 times between 7 and 10 in the morning. He answered none of them. At 11, 3 of his investors called a formal meeting. At 1 in the afternoon, 2 of his remaining lawyers, not Philip Grant, who was gone, and not Leonard Walsh, who was actively cooperating with the state, arrived at his hotel suite and sat across from him and explained, in careful measured language, what the exposure looked like and what his options were. They used the word limited several times. In Red Valley, none of this had yet become public. Sunday in the workshop was quieter than Saturday. Some of the brothers had ridden home the night before obligations, work, distance. About 30 remained. The mood was settled rather than tense. The particular calm of people who have done what they came to do and are waiting for the world to catch up with the reality they've already moved into. Ethan worked. He had started something new. Not the Billings rancher's jacket that was done, had been done since Thursday morning. This was something different, something I hadn't announced or explained, but that Megan and Marcus had both noticed, but because it was leather from the very best hide in the workshop, the piece he'd been saving for a project he hadn't yet named. He was working slowly, with more deliberateness than his usual deliberateness, choosing each cut the way a writer chooses words when the sentence matters more than the speed. Megan watched him for a while from across the workshop and didn't ask. Marcus watched him from the doorway and didn't ask either. They both understood without discussion what it probably was. At 3 in the afternoon, Ethan's regular phone, not the burner, the real one, the one he gave to customers, rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer it. He answered it. Mr. Walker. The voice was male, older, with the particular authority of someone who did not spend a lot of time doubting whether he should make a call. My name is Arthur Delaney. I'm the Deputy Attorney General for the state of Montana. Ethan's hand tightened slightly on the phone. Yes, sir. I'm calling you directly because I wanted you to hear this from me rather than through a news report. A brief pause. We have reviewed the documentation submitted by your attorney, Linda Reyes, in advance of tomorrow's scheduled meeting. Given the material we've received, including additional documentation submitted by Leonard Walsh of Walsh Property Law this morning, we have accelerated the timeline. Ethan said, What does that mean? It means we have already issued subpoenas, Arthur Delaney said. As of this morning, Victor Caldwell's company is under active criminal investigation by this office. An asset freeze has been requested and will be granted by the end of business today. A brief pause. I want you to know, Mr. Walker, that what you and the people of Red Valley assembled the documentation, the organized testimony, the pattern of evidence is exactly the kind of work that makes what we do possible. This didn't happen because of any one person, but it started with you. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Thank you, he said finally, for calling directly. Thank you for building something worth protecting, Delaney said. And ended the call. Ethan set the phone down on the workbench. Megan was looking at him. So was Marcus from the doorway. So was Dog. From the corner, Frank from the motel, who had shown up again with sandwiches, had gone very still. What happened? Marcus said. Active criminal investigation, Ethan said. Asset freeze by end of business today. He paused. The AG accelerated. They're not waiting for Monday. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Marcus walked across the workshop and put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. didn't say anything, just stood there with his hand on his brother's shoulder, the way men stand when words are the smaller option. Megan pressed both hands over her mouth for a moment. Please, then took them down. Her eyes were bright. Is it over? This part, Ethan said. The legal process is going to take months, maybe longer. There'll be hearings and proceedings and all the machinery that comes after the trigger is pulled. He looked at her steadily. But the thing he was doing to this town, to Rose Pittman, to the others, he shook his head. That's done. She nodded. She looked at the workbench, at the new piece of leather he'd been working on, at the careful cuts and the first delicate tool marks beginning to emerge from the hide. What are you making? She asked. He looked at the leather for a moment. Something that can't be burned, he said. Outside on the main street of Red Valley, the remaining 30 motorcycles stood in the late Sunday afternoon light. Inside the diner, Patty was serving the Sunday crowd bigger than usual. People coming in who didn't usually come. Neighbors who wanted to be near other neighbors. The particular gravity of a community that had been through something together and needed the warmth of proximity. Gary Sims had put a handwritten sign in the feed store window. It said, "Open. Always." Robert Cross had reopened his auto shop that morning, the first full Saturday and Sunday he'd worked in 3 months, since the pressure had gotten bad enough to make him consider whether staying was worth it. Red Valley was breathing, and in a hotel suite 30 miles away, Victor Caldwell sat in a chair by the window and looked at a phone full of missed calls and knew, with the particular clarity that comes to men, at the exact moment their empire stops being theoretical and starts being rubble, that the thing he had built on the fear and silence of other people had required, in the end, only one person to refuse to be either afraid or silent. One leather maker in a small desert town, one cedar box with a brass clasp, one vest, and the man who made it. The asset freeze hit Victor Caldwell's accounts on Sunday at 4:47 in the afternoon. Ethan didn't know the exact time until later. What he knew was that at 5 o'clock, Dog walked back into the workshop from outside where he'd been on his phone and looked at Marcus and said, "It's done." Linda just confirmed. The freeze went through. His company accounts are locked. Construction permits on 3 active projects are suspended pending investigation. Marcus looked at Ethan. Ethan kept his hands moving on the leather. The new piece, the one he hadn't named yet. He worked the edge of it with a beveling tool, slow and deliberate, feeling the resistance of the hide and adjusting his pressure accordingly. He didn't stop. He didn't look up immediately. Then he set the tool down and pressed both palms flat on the workbench and let out a breath that he had been holding, in some form or another, for the better part of 2 weeks. "Okay," he said. "That was all. Just okay." But the room heard everything inside it. Megan sat down on her stool without meaning to, the way your knees make decisions before your mind does. She put her hands in her lap and looked at the workbench surface and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "What happens to his people? The ones who work for him legitimately? The office staff, the project managers?" It was the right question, the human question, the one that Ethan had been thinking about since Sunday morning when the shape of the endgame had become clear. "Some of them will be fine," Ethan said. "The investigation is targeted. The fraud is specific. The people who were doing legitimate work for a fraudulent company aren't the same as the people who were doing the fraudulent work." He paused. "Cole Briggs is not fine. The 2 men who came with him are not fine. Victor Caldwell is not fine. But the woman who answered the phones in his office, she's going to be all right." "And Red Valley?" Gary Sims asked. He'd come in an hour ago and hadn't left. "Red Valley," Ethan said, "is going to be exactly what it was before Victor Caldwell decided he wanted it to be something else." He looked at Gary directly, "Which means the people in it get to decide what it becomes." He's not a developer from out of town, not a man with a checkbook and a lawyer and someone named Cole. Gary nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that Ethan would remember for a long time. "My grandfather built the feed store in 1951. My father used to say that a business is just a building until it has decades of people in it. Then it becomes something else, something that belongs to the town instead of just the owner." He paused. "I almost sold it. I came very close, and I keep thinking about what my grandfather would have thought of that." "What would he have thought?" Megan asked. Gary looked at her. He would have been ashamed of me," he said simply. And he would have been right. The room was quiet with that for a moment. Marcus, who had been leaning in the doorway, straightened and came inside fully. He sat down on the stool next to Ethan's workbench, the stool where he'd been sitting that first morning. The stool that had, over the last 3 days, he's become his unofficial place in this workshop. The way places become yours through use rather than claim. I need to say something to you, Marcus said to Ethan. And I need you to hear it without deflecting. Ethan looked at him. All right, when you walked away 17 years ago, Marcus said, I was angry. Not right away. Right away I understood, because I knew what was happening with you, and I knew why you needed to go. But later, months later, a year later, the anger came. Because you were the best of us, Ethan. The clearest thinking, the most grounded, the one who knew the difference between using power and abusing it. And when you left, we lost that. He paused. We made mistakes in the years after you left that I don't think we would have made if you'd been there. Ethan said, Marcus, I'm not done. Firm, but not harsh. I'm not saying that to put it on you. Your decision was right. You needed to leave, and you did what you needed to do. I'm saying it because I want you to understand what came back into my life 3 days ago when I heard your voice on that phone. He held Ethan's gaze. It wasn't just you. It was the way you think, the way you build things, the way you look at a man like Victor Caldwell, and instead of getting angry, you get methodical, and you construct the exact thing needed to bring him down, and then you wait for the right moment and you execute it. He's without a single unnecessary move. He shook his head. I spent 17 years running a charter, and I never stopped learning from a man who wasn't there anymore. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Something moved across his face, not embarrassment, not quite, but something in that territory. He's the discomfort of being accurately seen. I made my own mistakes, Ethan said. Plenty of them. I know that. Leaving the way I did. Not keeping contact. Thinking I could seal that whole part of my life in a box and lock it. He glanced at the cedar box on the end of the workbench. Habit, reflex. Turns out things in sealed boxes don't actually go away. They just wait. No, Marcus said, they don't go away. The evening settled into something Ethan hadn't felt in a long time and couldn't immediately name. It was something like peace, but with weight to it, the kind that comes not from the absence of difficulty, but from having moved through difficulty and come out the other side with the things that mattered still intact. The workshop still standing, the people around him still there. The work on the bench in front of him still progressing, one careful cut at a time. Frank from the motel showed up at 6 with more food than anyone had asked for. Patty came over from the diner and sat with Megan near the back wall, and the two women talked quietly about things that weren't the crisis, about Patty's grandmother's recipes and Megan's family in Billings and the particular joy of learning a craft with your hands. Dog and Jesse and 2 other brothers gathered near the front of the workshop and played cards on an upturned crate. Gary stayed. It felt, in the way that some evenings unexpectedly feel, like something that had always been supposed to happen and had just now found its time. At 7:15, Rose Pittman called again. Ethan answered immediately. Mr. Walker, she said, I heard. Word travels fast, he said. And he said it the same way he'd said it 3 days ago to Gary Sims in this same workshop, but differently with something underneath it that hadn't been there before. I called the 2 young men you sent, she said. They told me about the freeze. About the investigation. She paused. I've been sitting here for the last hour thinking about my mother. She died 11 years ago. She ran this restaurant for 41 years, and she never had a single day where she thought about selling. Not because she didn't have hard times. Because she believed that some things you hold on to not because they're profitable, but because they're real. Her voice was steady but had texture to it now, the texture of someone holding something carefully. I'm going to get my restaurant back. Properly. Whatever Caldwell's pressure did to my permits and my reputation in this county, I'm going to fight that and get it back properly. And when I do, she paused, I want to send you something. Miss Pittman, you don't have to. My grandmother's recipe for the best beef stew you have ever tasted in your life, she said. Written in her handwriting on the original paper. Because you kept something of your father's close to you for 19 years and you understand what that means. And I want you to have something of my grandmother's close to you too. A pause. If that's all right. Ethan had to take a moment. He turned slightly away from the room, not all the way, just enough. That's more than all right, he said. Thank you. He hung up and stood with his back partly to the room for a second. She didn't say anything. She just let the moment be what it was. Monday arrived and moved fast. Linda Reyes walked into the Montana Attorney General's office at 9 in the morning with a file that was 3 inches thick and the organized, systematic precision of someone who had been waiting a long time to put exactly this in front of exactly the right people. Leonard Walsh arrived separately, with his own documentation and his own attorney. And the combination of what the two of them brought into that office was, by all subsequent accounts, one of the most comprehensive fraud packages the AG's office had received in 11 years. The formal investigation announcement went public at 2 in the afternoon. Victor Caldwell was named specifically. 3 additional individuals in his company were named. Cole Briggs and his 2 associates were referred to local law enforcement for the arson and destruction of property at Ethan Walker's workshop. The formal language was precise and damning and left nothing ambiguous about what had happened on that Thursday afternoon when a leather vest burned on the main street of Red Valley. Ethan read the announcement on his phone standing at the workbench. He read it twice. Then he set the phone face down on the bench and picked up his tools and kept working. Megan watched him from across the workshop. "You're not going to say anything?" "What would you like me to say?" "I don't know. Something." "React." He looked at her. "I am reacting." "Your stitch?" "That is my reaction," he said. "When I don't know how to feel everything at once, I stitch." "You've known me for 3 years. You know this about me." She looked at the piece he was working on, the new leather, the carefully beveled edges, the first panel of tooling beginning to take shape. She leaned forward slightly to see it better. "Ethan," she said, "is that an eagle?" He didn't answer immediately. He made one more careful pass with the swivel knife before he looked up. "Going to be," he said. She stared at him. "You're remaking it." "Not the same one. You can't make the same thing twice." He looked back at the leather. "But something that holds what it was supposed to hold." "For your father." "For my father," he said, "and for myself. And because those men thought that burning a thing destroyed what it meant." He ran his thumb along the edge of the cut he'd just made, checking the depth, the angle, the consistency. "It doesn't. The knowledge is still here. The feeling is still here. The 2 years I spent making the original, every hour of that is in my hands. They burned the leather. They didn't touch any of the rest of it." Megan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can I help?" He looked at her. "I know I'm not at your level," she said quickly. "I'm not suggesting I do the main panels or the tooling or anything you need to be perfect. But the edge finishing, the back panels, the interior lining work." She met his eyes. "Let me help." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had showed up 3 years ago with capable hands and a need for work and had stayed because she found something here that she hadn't expected to find, not just a skill, but a person who took the work and, by extension, the workers seriously. "Yes," he said. "All right." She picked up her tools. They worked side by side without speaking for a while. The workshop quiet around them. The tools moving the way good tools do in practiced hands. The leather slowly becoming something. Marcus came in at noon and stood and watched them work for a moment before saying anything. "I'm riding out tomorrow morning," he said. "Most of the brothers are leaving today or tonight. Dog and Jesse are gone already." Ethan looked up. "I know. You going to be all right?" "Yes." Marcus looked at the leather on the workbench. At the eagle taking shape, the wing spread, the talons beginning to emerge from the surface under Ethan's swivel knife. He looked at it for a long time. "That's going to be something," he said quietly. "It already is," Megan said, and she meant it. Marcus sat down for the last time on his stool by the workbench. He had the easy posture of a man who was comfortable in the space he'd occupied, who didn't need anything from it that he wasn't already getting. He and Ethan talked for a while, not about Caldwell, not about the investigation, not about any of the machinery of the last 5 days. They talked about people. Brothers from years ago, where they were now, what had become of them. They talked about Marcus's daughter, who was 19 and apparently terrifying in the best way. They talked about the 2 brothers who had died, the ones Ethan had mentioned to Megan that first morning, the ones whose deaths had been part of why he left. Marcus told him things about those deaths he hadn't known. Things that were painful, but also somehow settling. Things that made the grief make more sense, which is the only thing you can ever really ask of grief. At 2:30, a man Ethan had never met walked into the workshop. He was in his late 60s, lean, wearing a good coat over work clothes, with a face that had spent a lot of time in weather and eyes that moved around a room the way a craftsman's eyes move taking in the tools. The materials, the quality of the work on the bench, before settling on the person behind it. Mr. Walker, he said. Yes, my name is Thomas Hale. A pause. I'm Terry's father. Ethan set his tools down. Deputy Terry Hale's father. He hadn't known Terry had family still in the area. I drove in this morning, Thomas said. I saw the news. I've been seeing it since the video. He came a few steps further into the workshop and stopped, looking at the workbench, at the new piece of leather taking shape. I'm a woodworker, have been for 50 years. I know what it means when someone burns what you made with your hands. He paused. I came to say that I'm sorry it happened, and I came to bring you something. He reached into the coat pocket and produced a small piece of wood. He held it out to Ethan. Ethan took it. It was a carved piece of hardwood walnut. Dark and dense, shaped into a flat rectangle roughly the size of a book cover, with a relief carving on one face. An eagle, not identical to the one Ethan had tooled onto the burned vest, different in style, in the particular interpretation of the spread wings, but unmistakably the same animal, the same spirit. I carved it last night, Thomas said, after I saw the news. My hands needed somewhere to put what I was feeling. He paused. I thought maybe you'd understand that. Ethan looked at the carving in his hands for a long moment. He turned it over, felt the back, the smooth finish, the care in it. He looked up at Thomas Hale. I understand it exactly, he said. Thomas nodded. He looked around the workshop one more time, at Marcus on his stool, at Megan with her tools, at the cedar box with its cracked lid, and the burned brass clasp sitting on top of it. He looked at all of it. You built something real here, he said. Real things are worth keeping. He left. Ethan set the carved eagle on the workbench next to the cedar box. He looked at both of them, the new and the remnant of the old. Then he went back to work. The next twist came at 4 in the afternoon, and nobody in the workshop saw it coming. Philip Grant, Victor Caldwell's lawyer, who had stepped down Sunday, who had given Ethan his most complete read on Victor's vulnerability, called Linda Reyes with information that Linda immediately relayed to Ethan through Marcus's phone. Grant had, in the process of extracting himself from Victor's legal team, reviewed documents he'd never been shown directly. Among them was a property deed, specifically the deed to Ethan's workshop property. Not a purchase offer, not a development plan, a deed. Victor Caldwell, 6 months ago before the letters, before the gray-suited visits, before the fake code violations, and the broken windows and Cole Briggs with the gasoline can quietly and through a shell company, attempted to file a fraudulent claim on the deed to the workshop property. A claim that, if it had gone undetected, would have made the property legally appear to belong to the shell company rather than to Ethan. It had gone undetected. Until now. Linda's voice on the phone, relayed through Marcus, was controlled but tight in the way of someone managing their reaction carefully. He was never just trying to buy you out, Ethan. He was trying to take it regardless. The pressure campaign was to get you to leave voluntarily before you discovered the deed claim. If you'd sold, the fraudulent deed becomes irrelevant and he has clean title. If you refuse long enough, eventually his lawyers would have surfaced the false claim in court and tried to force you out legally with documents you didn't know existed. Ethan sat with that for a moment. Marcus was watching him. You didn't know. No, Ethan said, I didn't know. Does it change anything? Ethan thought about it. Really thought. About the 19 years, the workshop, the deed he'd signed in good faith and filed legally and never had reason to question. About a man who had decided from the beginning that the question wasn't whether Ethan would go, but only how to make him go in the way that was cleanest for Victor's purposes. It changes the size of what he is, Ethan said. It doesn't change what we do next. He looked at Mark. Tell Linda to add it to the AG's file. Every piece of this belongs in that file. Already done, Marcus said. She anticipated that. By 5 that afternoon, the fraudulent deed claim had been flagged, documented, and added to the criminal case. It would become, in subsequent months, one of the most significant elements of the prosecution because it demonstrated not opportunistic fraud but premeditated, systematic fraud, the kind that carries heavier consequences in a court of law. Victor Caldwell was charged 18 days later, but that was ahead of where the story lived right now. Right now, in this workshop, on this Monday evening, the machinery of justice was turning, and Ethan Walker was at his workbench, finishing the first full day of work on the new vest. and Megan was beside him, working the interior panels with careful hands. And Marcus was on his stool for the last time. And the town outside was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before, not the compressed, pressured quiet of a community holding its breath, but the open quiet of one that had exhaled. At 7 that evening, Marcus stood, and the standing was final, and everyone in the room knew it. He and Ethan looked at each other across the workbench. "Come visit," Marcus said. "I will," Ethan said, and meant it differently than he would have meant it before this week. Not to rejoin, but to visit, that's all I'm asking." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "You're not lost anymore, you know." Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. "I don't mean that you were before," Marcus said. "I mean there was something in you when you called, even through the phone. Something that was looking for confirmation that the life you'd built here was real. That it meant what you thought it meant." He paused. "It's real, Ethan. It means everything you thought it did. More, probably." He glanced at Megan, at the workshop, at the tools on the wall. "Your father would have stood in this room and been so damn proud he wouldn't have known what to say." Ethan said nothing. Marcus put his hand on Ethan's shoulder, the same gesture from Sunday evening, the same wordless communication of men who had shared something that language wasn't built to carry. Then he walked out. Ethan heard the motorcycle start outside, heard it join the sound of others starting, heard the engines move down the main street of Red Valley, deep and steady, and then turn north and gradually fade into the Montana evening until there was nothing left of them but the memory of the sound. He stood still for a moment. Then he sat back down. He picked up his swivel knife. He went back to the Eagle. The weeks after that were not without difficulty. The legal process is always slow, and slow legal processes require patience that is harder to sustain than the acute patience of a crisis. There were depositions and document requests and hearings and motions and the grinding administrative weight of a criminal investigation unfolding in real time. There were days when Ethan fielded calls from Linda Reyes about developments he barely understood and trusted her to handle because she was handling them correctly. There were days when journalists called and he did and did not talk to them, making those decisions case by case based on whether speaking would help or hurt the people the story was supposed to protect. Cole Briggs pleaded guilty to arson and destruction of property 10 weeks after the vest burned. His 2 associates took plea deals of their own. The formal sentencing came later. But the fact of the guilt was established. On record. Undeniable. Victor Caldwell fought harder and longer than his position warranted, because men like Victor Caldwell always do. He hired new lawyers, and those lawyers filed motions, and those motions were addressed one by one. The asset freeze remained in place. The fraudulent deed claim was prosecuted as its own separate count. Leonard Walsh testified for 3 hours in a deposition that by all accounts was precise and damaging and left no room for reinterpretation. Ethan didn't attend any of the legal proceedings. He wasn't required to, and he chose not to. He'd given his testimony in writing, formally, thoroughly, and he trusted the system not blindly, not naively, but with the measured trust of someone who had done the work to make the system function the way it was supposed to function. What instead was work. The vest took 4 months. It was not the same as the original. He had said that from the beginning, and he meant it, because the original belonged to a younger version of himself working out a grief that was still raw, and this one belonged to a man who had moved through that grief and found something on the other side of it that was harder and clearer and more lasting. The eagle on the back panel was different, the wings at a different angle, the head turning the opposite direction, the talons curved in a way that suggested readiness rather than descent. The border tooling was more complex than the original, the geometric pattern his father had sketched on that paper napkin 19 years ago expanded and deepened. The same shapes but interlocking in 3 dimensions rather than 2. Megan worked on it with him for the full 4 months. Not the main panels, those were Ethan's alone, but the interior. The edge finishing. The lining. The hardware that had to be chosen and placed with the same care as everything else. She worked on it the way an apprentice works on a masterpiece, when they understand that what they're part of is larger than any single task, carefully, reverently, with full attention. She also, during those 4 months, became someone different. Not dramatically, not in the ways that announce themselves, but in the way that happens when you watch someone you respect do the hardest thing they've ever done and come out the other side still standing and still stitching. It changes your understanding of what's possible, It changes what you believe you're capable of. It changes the size of the work you're willing to attempt. In January, she started her first solo project, a custom jacket for a woman in Billings who had seen the Gazette article and the video and had written Ethan a letter asking if he was taking custom orders. He wrote back and said yes, and then he handed the letter to Megan and said, "This one is yours." Yes. She looked at him. "Mine. Design it, source the leather, do the work." Yes. "I'm here if you need me, but it's yours." He looked at her steadily. Yes. "You're ready." She wasn't sure she believed that, but she trusted that he wouldn't say it if he didn't mean it. Yes. Because Ethan Walker did not say things he didn't mean. Yes. Not ever. Yes. Not once in the 3.5 years she had known him. Yes. She designed it. She sourced the leather. She did the work. It took 6 weeks. It was not perfect. She could see 5 things she would do differently next time. But it was good. Real good. The kind of good that comes from hands that have been learning the right things in the right order from the right person. When the woman from Billings came to pick it up, she held it for a moment and looked at it, and then looked at Megan and said, "You made this?" Yes. "Yes," Megan said. "How long have you been doing this?" Yes. 4 years, Megan said. Yes. And felt the truth of it in a way she hadn't felt it before. Not 4 years of assisting, but 4 years of actually learning. Yes. Which is different. Yes. Which is the whole difference. Yes. Rose Pittman got her permits restored in February. The fraudulent interference with her licensing, traced directly to Caldwell's company, was reversed through the same investigation that was dismantling everything else Victor had built. She sent Ethan the recipe she'd promised, handwritten by her grandmother, on paper that was yellow at the edges and smelled faintly of the kitchen it had lived in for 50 years. She sent it in a flat cedar box, because someone had told her about the cedar box, and she thought it was right. Ethan set it on the shelf above the workbench, next to the carved wooden eagle Thomas Hale had brought him, next to the burned brass clasp from the original vest, which he had never moved and never would. Gary Sims expanded the feed store in March, using the space next door that had been empty since Caldwell's pressure had driven the previous tenant out. He hired 2 people from town who needed work. He repainted the front of the building for the first time in 12 years. Patty Nguyen added 3 new recipes to the diner menu, 2 of them from her grandmother's original Saigon repertoire. Dishes she'd been meaning to introduce for years but hadn't, in the way you don't do the thing that matters most when you're not sure the ground you're standing on is stable. Yes, the ground was stable now. She made the dishes. They were extraordinary. Robert Cross reopened his auto shop full-time and posted a sign in the window. Yes. Family business. Yes. 1,000. Yes. 987. Still here. The vest was finished on a Thursday in late March, 4 months and 3 days after Ethan had started it. He finished the final stitch late in the afternoon with Megan beside him, and he set the needle down, and he held the vest up and looked at it. Really looked at it. At the eagle, with its wings at a different angle from the original, its head turned to look forward instead of to the side, its talons curved open rather than closed. At the border his father had sketched on a napkin. He's expanded and deepened. He's the same foundation, but more of it now. He's more of everything. At the lining Megan had done dark blue, stitched with a precision she'd earned over 4 years and 4 months of learning from someone who understood that quality was not a destination, but a practice. He held it for a long time. Then he went to the shelf. He took down the burned brass clasp. He held it in his palm, distorted from the heat, darkened to a color that had no name exactly. The remnant of what had been destroyed and the proof that it had existed. He looked at the new vest. He looked at the clasp. Then he did something that Megan watched without speaking and understood completely. He placed the burned clasp in the inner pocket of the new vest. Not attached, not displayed. Just placed there, in the inside pocket, against the lining, where it would sit against the heart of whoever wore it invisible from outside, present from within. He folded the vest carefully. He placed it in the cedar box. He set the cracked lid on top. He had glued it and clamped it months ago. It held now, the crack a visible line through the wood that he had decided not to hide, because things that have been broken and mended are not less than things that have never been broken. He closed the box. He put his hand flat on the lid. He stayed like that for a moment, eyes down. Hand on the box. The workshop quiet around him. Megan quiet beside him. The tools on the wall. The smell of leather and linseed oil. The particular quality of the late afternoon light coming through the windows of a place that was still standing. Then he lifted his hand, he straightened, he looked at Megan. Please, thank you, he said, for the lining. She shook her head. Please, thank you for letting me be part of it. He looked at the box. Please, my father used to say something, he said. He said it so often it became part of the air of wherever he was. Please, he said, a man's work outlives him if it's real work. And by real, he didn't mean good. He meant true. He meant made from something that actually mattered to the person who made it. He paused. Please, I used to think he was talking about leather. About craft, he looked at Megan. He was talking about everything. She looked at him. Both things can be true. He almost smiled. Yeah, both things can be true. Victor Caldwell was convicted on 7 counts of fraud, 2 counts of conspiracy, and 1 count of criminal interference with property records. The sentence was 11 years, reduced to 8, on various conditions that the legal system applied in its particular way. His development company was dissolved. The properties he had acquired through fraudulent means were subject to recovery proceedings that would take years to fully resolve, but that moved in one unambiguous direction, toward the people those properties had been taken from. Ethan did not celebrate the conviction. He read it in a brief notice Linda sent him on a Tuesday morning, and he filed it in the same mental space where he'd filed everything else not dismissed, not forgotten, but settled. Done. The way a piece of finished work is done. Not perfect, because nothing is, but complete. What he thought about that Tuesday morning with the notice in front of him was not Victor Caldwell at all. He thought about his father, sitting in this same workshop 19 years ago, not literally. His father had never been to Red Valley, but present the way the dead are present when you've kept them close enough. He thought about the vest, both of them, the burned one and the new one in the cedar box, and the eagle on the back of the new one, with its wings spread and its head turned forward and its talons open, not grasping but ready, not clenching but capable. He thought about what it had meant to call Marcus. Not the practical meaning, the brothers, the documentation, the momentum. The other meaning, the one underneath. The meaning of saying, out loud, to someone who mattered. I need help. I cannot do this alone. I built something real here, and I need the people who are real to me to stand in the street and let the world see that it matters. That was the bravest thing he'd done. Not the night stitching. Not the confrontation with Cole Briggs. Not the measured, methodical dismantling of Victor Caldwell's empire. The phone call. The 2 words, it's Ethan. And the answer that came back, that had already been there for 17 years waiting. We're coming. He put Linda's notice in the desk drawer, and he closed it, and he walked to the workbench, and he put on his apron, and he picked up his tools. There was a commission waiting. A saddle for a rancher in Billings who'd been waiting patiently for 6 weeks. A pair of riding gloves for a woman in Missoula who'd ordered them because she'd seen the Gazette article and wanted to support the workshop. A custom jacket for a veteran in Whitefish who'd driven 3 hours to the workshop 2 weeks ago and sat across the bench from Ethan and told him what kind of man he was trying to be and asked if Ethan could help him build something that reflected that. Ethan had said yes to all of it. He always said yes when the work was real. He sat down. He pulled the saddle leather toward him. He found the stitch line he'd marked the day before. He picked up the needle and he worked. Because some men are known by what they destroy, and some men are known by what they build. And the difference between those 2 kinds of men is not circumstance and not opportunity, and not luck, it is character. And character is what you do with your hands when nobody is watching, and the work that comes from character does not burn. It does not burn because fire can only reach what's on the surface. What lives in the hands, in the memory, in the love for the person who first showed you that making something real with your time on this earth was worth every minute of the cost, that lives somewhere fire cannot touch. Ethan Walker was not the most powerful man in Red Valley. He was not the wealthiest or the most connected or the most feared. He was the man who stayed, who built something true in a town that needed people who meant what they said and made what they promised, and stood in the street without flinching when men with gasoline cans showed up to test whether what they had built could be taken. It couldn't. It never could. Because the things that are truly made from love and grief and patience and 20 years of steady hands and 1 phone call made at exactly the right moment to exactly the right person do not belong to the fire. They belong to everyone who was ever told that what they built wasn't worth protecting. And they last.